Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is that time again to back in and close the vault. If you are hearing me now, you are now within the Skiff International Podcast. For those new to the audience, the Skiff stands for Situations and Conversations Inspiring Intellectual Futures. From Low Class to Outcast Podcast, we're officially worldwide with a show that is for everyone seeking updates from the field. Skiff crew right here, we are ready to go. We are strictly for the culture. Before we get started, disclaimer, gotta let you guys know the opinions is expressed here are our own and do not necessarily reflect organizations, especially within the U.S. government agencies, Department of War, anything in between. We're just out here vibing and hoping you guys have a good time with us. All right, you got me, Christian the Hype Man Sledge. We got Chief B. Rouser. Chief, how you doing out there, sir?
Hey, man. Look, happy Sunday. Let's go. Let's get into this conversation. I'm ready.
All right. Then you got, of course, everybody's sister in arms. You got Lorraine, L.A.M.F. Johnson. How you doing, ma'am?
I'm doing well.
All right, cool. And then, of course, Kayla's out this week doing big things for the Air Force. Now, some of this content may be too positive or uplifting for you guys. Maybe could create some conflict within your souls, but that's okay. The podcast is in the name of the Most High, so we are not guilty today. We do have a special guest in the chamber. Me and this individual go at least 17 years back when I was enlisted and I was in the Colors Flight. And he was the commander of the United States Air Force Honor Guard out there in Washington, D.C. Ran into him several times, especially in 2020 out there in the Middle East as we were doing our tours. Everybody give it up for Colonel Retired Raymond Howell, sir. How's it going? Thanks for joining us.
Great to see you again, Sledge.
So this week, we wanted to lead off with privileges and challenges of command and tough decisions in between. Who else better than you to be able to kind of walk us through some of those? So we have a couple of questions out there, and hopefully you'll be able to enlighten us today. So we'll go ahead and start it off with the basics. So really quickly, since you've been retired from active duty, you've been pretty busy out there. I've seen you in LinkedIn. I've seen you in social media, just out there traveling the world. I just wanted to ask, what have been the activities that have occupied your time the most after your active duty career?
Yeah, sure. So I left, actually, we were, as you mentioned, we were out at IUD together. I retired straight out of there. I came back to Northern California, which is where I'm from. I took a weird little fellowship at Stanford University called the Distinguished Careers Institute. And while I was there, I dug into a problem for something called the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation, which is here at Stanford. And in doing that, I was very interested in the South China Sea, which is actually where I spent my early years in the Air Force when I was enlisted and a Vietnamese cryptolinguist. And of course, I went back to Vietnam as the air attaché after I left the Honor Guard. And so I was super interested in South China Sea issues, and that led me into what has turned into a pretty interesting maritime transparency project that keeps me very busy traveling back and forth into the Indo-Pacific region, a lot of trips to the Philippines and elsewhere around the region. Yeah, it's actually it's also got me into podcasting, so we've got something in common there. We are in the same biz, as you will.
Yeah, I figured, Colonel, since you got time for that. See, we do this on active duty time. I don't know if you would have had time active duty to do this, but for you, I mean, I figured it would be a little bit more bandwidth for you to be able to do that. How has that been? Like, has that been easier, or is it just as much as gravity? What's your
I think it comes and goes. So sometimes there are super busy periods, and when it comes to podcasting, of course, it can get a little rough when I'm on the road a lot. I do some episodes from hotel rooms and things like that, and I've got some pretty funny stories from trying to make certain things work. I do some television interviews and things. To tell you about a story about when I almost got arrested in D.C. for doing an interview, a very strange situation, almost on live TV, which would have been really fun. So, but it's been a blast. I really had a lot of fun. I'm not making any extra money, but it's sure given me a fun post retirement.
Yeah, I think that's what me and Chief will ultimately, when we put this thing together, when Michaela was said, this is what we want to do. We're not in it for the money. We're in it to just educate and advocate and have some fun out there. And I think that gives us motivation to be able to say, hey, it's not about that. It's about just getting the word out and pushing people in the right direction. So I can appreciate that.
Well, if
Yeah.
anyone out there is interested in Indo-Pacific affairs, the name of our podcast is "Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific?" So, and we try to keep it all very practical. Why do we care about this issue?
Yeah, it makes sense. And we'll make sure we drop that in the so you can folks can link into that. No problem. Okay. So next question, was your first command at the United States Air Force Honor Guard? What drove you to command the Guard of all places?
So I had some very strange commands. My first command was actually a deployed command. So it was like one of those. It was early days in our Iraq deployments. So it was only like 3 to 4 months, and so I did a command of a communication squadron in Iraq in 2004. I then did a very odd command, which was a postal detachment. This was officially off the command list, but it I ended up doing basically all postal operations for the Middle East out of Al Udeid. So my first two commands were both in deployed environments, and then the honor guard was my third. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. I was, I ended up going to the honor guard in part because I'd been deployed and kind of been on so many short-term assignments that my family was exhausted, and I was happy to get into the DC area and thought we bought a house, we were going to get the kids into school, we are going to spend some time in one place. And almost immediately after I got there, they said, "Okay, then the next command list is coming up. Everybody needs to put their name in." And of course, I was like a major going on lieutenant colonel, and I'm like, "Man, I just got done moving around." So I turned down the opportunity to apply for command, and I was called up. So I was working on the joint staff. I was called up to the two stars office, and he wanted to know why I hadn't put my name in. And I just told him the truth. I said, "We're wiped out. We need time." I would by then I was over 20 years because I was prior enlisted.
Yeah.
And I said, "Frankly, I just got to do what's right for my family." And he said, "Okay, I get it." And then out of nowhere, I get this thing comes across my desk, says that they need a commander for the honor guard. I'm like, wow, I could command it. I wouldn't have to move. So it was
Mhm.
pretty, I was like, okay. So I put my name in and I got it. And so what the funny part was, when they reached out to me, so the honor guard reaches out to me, the action officer, and says, "Hey, we want to bring you over to do change of command rehearsal." And I'm like, man, I've been through like 4 changes of command, right? I took command twice, I gave up command
Right.
twice. I know how to do a change of command.
Uh-huh.
The really smart person who like should have been sitting there goes, this is the Air Force Honor Guard, right? They're not going to do a change of command like everybody else does a change of command. Somehow in this whole thing, this fact never occurred to me. So I end up going out. They give me the big briefing. I'm like, holy crap. I mean, this is all, I've got all this stuff going on. I got to remember, we're going to pass and review, and we're going to all these things. So go through the whole briefing. I've got my eyes open now. I've realized I got myself in pretty deep here. I got to somehow figure out how to get through this ceremony without making a fool of myself. And so we get to the inspection of troops. And so the ops officer, a great guy named Willis, Major Tyson Willis, is standing there with his saber, and he's waiting for me to go stand next to him. And I go stand next to him, and I'm facing like 45 degrees off of where I'm supposed to be facing. And he literally reaches around my waist and turns me 45 degrees in the middle of the ceremony with the whole honor guard watching, all the people up in the stands. I felt like an idiot, but it was so funny to just have this. And Tyson was a big dude.
He's big. He's big.
I reach around and like pull my waist. It was great. As it was definitely memorable, and I remember thinking I'm making a really great impression on this honor guard here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so that no, that was really good. I remember that day. I remember that day. That was a unique day because you got your haircut that day too. I
I
remember
did
that
too.
too.
Yeah. Actually, this is one of the things I thought ahead about. And I was like, hey, how about, because I had like normal Air Force hair, I didn't have honor guard Air Force hair, right? I said, how about if like on the very first day, somebody cuts my hair so it's more like honor guard hair? So yeah, we went over to ceremonial hall, and
Yep.
actually there was a barber, but the barbers worked normal hours. And so since we weren't on normal hours, whatever it was, we had one of the guardsmen who used to cut hair all the time, cut my hair.
Was it Otis King? I can't remember who it was.
Can't
Okay.
remember either, but
Okay.
yeah,
But I
sorry.
remember I was there. Yeah, I was there. That's crazy. That's like yesterday, but it's not. Okay. Cool. It's like 17 years ago. It's a long time ago. Okay. So during that command or any command, what's the best highlight or moment during any of those commands where you like, we got something done today?
Well, okay, so I'll tell you, some of my best moments at the honor guard was I would just go out if I was like under a pile of paperwork or whatever I was doing, I would just go out into the middle of what we called the H, which is like where like everybody would walk back, and we call it the H because of the various sidewalks would go back and forth. And we had some benches out there. And I would just go out and sit in the sun and watch the firing party over here and the body bearers over here. And everybody was just doing their thing. They were just rehearsing. And I would just go out and sit and watch and remind myself why I was doing what I was doing. So that was a lot of the best stuff. I'll say one of the most memorable was we buried a U.S. Senator while I was there. We buried Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska. And the thing about that was there was a former Air Force four-star named Joe Ralston. He had formerly been the vice chief of staff. Actually, he's the vice chairman. He was the commander of the NATO-shaped the EUCOM. So he had all these credentials, but he had retired a long time ago. But he calls me at my desk one day and introduces himself as a friend of the Stevens family and has all kinds of opinions about how the funeral needs to go.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. Hey, Arlington funeral is kind of a particular thing. We don't just sort of make
Right.
this up as we
Right,
go
right.
along.
Got it.
But his big thing was he wanted the flyover of 4 F-22s to happen on the last note of taps. And I'm like, wait a minute.
That's pretty.
Yeah. Well, the reason we don't do that is you have to call them out like 4 minutes out. And in between like that and everything else, you go backwards. You have, taps, and you have military honors before that. So the 3 volley salute. And then before that, you're into the chaplain's remarks. Right. And so I'm explaining this to him and he says, all I need you to do is tell me exactly how long taps last and how long the military honors last, and I'll take care of the chaplain.
Okay.
So then I called my boss over at the group, and I'm like, "Hey, boss, this just happened." He said he can't do that, and I'm like, "You want to call him back and tell him?" So we get out there, and actually we go out there with him, and we walk the grounds, and he's got this guy from Air Combat Command. He was going to operate the radio, and we talked through the whole thing. And on the day of the burial, we're standing out there. We got everybody is there. We've got Secretary Gates, Secretary of Defense Gates is there. We've got several senators are there. We got the Chief of Staff of the Air Force was Nordy Schwartz at the time, and he was going to stand at the foot of the head of the casket while I was at the foot. Anyway, so all of this is happening, and the chaplain is talking. He's the chaplain of the Senate, 2-star Navy officer, and he's given his eulogy. And at a certain point, I can see General Ralston lean over to the radio officer because he's right in my line of sight, standing right next to Secretary Gates. He leans over and he whispers something. I'm like, okay, 4 minutes, because he's
Right.
and the chaplain's talking. And the chaplain's talking, and I'm like, this is not going to work. So in the end, sure enough, they show up on the first note of taps and drown out taps completely. Yeah, the band was mad because that's supposed to be one of their moments.
That's their thing,
The
yeah.
band was always mad and about something out there. And afterwards, General Wilson was like, "Oh yeah, oh great." I'm like, "Okay, well, whatever. As long as you're happy, I guess everybody else is happy."
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I know one of my highlights out there was obviously 2009, the inauguration. So just because how much energy went into it, how big it was gigantic. It was cold too. Anyway, yeah, that was my big thing. It was freezing. I still remember that. Moving to the next thing, what was like the hardest time that you had out there? What were some of the tough decisions that you had to make? Some of the tough calls, if any?
Well, so the hardest time is this one's easy, and you know exactly where I'm going with this sledge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was January of 2011. So I had already told myself I was sort of infamous. Frankly, the honor guard was not excited about how little time I was spending on ceremonies. And so I had decided that I was going to spend as much time as I could out in Arlington and things during my last 6 months. But God had other plans. So
You told the universe the plans again?
in January, I remember I got a text from my first sergeant, and he said, "Get ready for some." It wasn't bad news. It was something like that. "Get ready for some challenging information," or something like that. So it turns out that some members of the honor guard had been experimenting with spice. And this was the early days of spice, the synthetic marijuana, right? It wasn't showing up on the usual tests. It wasn't illegal everywhere. They could get it at the back of liquor stores and stuff like that. But of course, it was illegal in the Air Force. Once we figured it out, somebody basically ratted them out. because it wasn't coming up on the urinalysis. And once we found out that it was out there, I was like, okay, let's go as hard as we can. Let's get this out as quickly and thoroughly as we can. And so we ended up with like a dozen ceremonial guardsmen with some connection to this spice ring. And it was terrible. It was awful. And I remember, so I had the DO at the time was a guy named John Pylong, and I went to him and I said, "Look, you're just going to have to run operations because I'm going to be doing this like all the time for a while." The whole idea about me going out to Arlington, that was over. But then the thing that happened after that was just as hard because it wasn't just this. It was like and a lot of this had to do with the same people who were involved in the spice ring, like, kept getting in trouble in these little ways that were just enough to get them into police blotter, so that everybody knew when Airman Schmuckatelli was down at giving his testimony at the cop shop and happened to show up drunk or something like that. Everybody knew everything. It was like the whole place had gone crazy for a period of time. And there's an old saying in politics: if you're explaining, you're losing. I felt like I was explaining all the time, you know, and it was just crazy stuff. We had one where a guy, I don't know if you remember this, Lid. We had a guy who went out for his 21st birthday. They made a plan. They weren't going to drive. They were going to take cabs. They went out to a club. But what they forgot was that when it's your birthday, everybody buys you a drink. And this guy got so drunk he ended up with alcohol poisoning. They tried to get back to his dorm room, and one of the guys who was trying to get back to his dorm room fell down the stairs. So the ambulance shows up and transports both guys to the hospital. And I'm in front of the 2-star on Monday morning trying to explain exactly how all this happened. And
Yeah, that's
I was
rough.
so honestly, at the end, I truly could have got fired almost at any time. And somebody would have just said, "All right, everybody out of the pool. We're wiping the slate clean," because up the chain they want to be able to say, "Hey, I did something about this." And I was very fortunate, and I'm thankful to this day that I had a group commander and a wing commander who stood up for me, because at the time the 2-star was General Darren McDew. And the thing
Mm.
about General McDew is he did not suffer fools. And I looked a whole hell of a lot like a fool
Mm.
when he looked at the honor guard. And I was very grateful that I had some top cover.
And
Huh.
whew, yeah, I remember that.
Huh.
That was some rough times, but you made it through. And again,
Yes.
that's I feel, at least in the small amount of time, I didn't understand that as a young staff sergeant, rising tech sergeant. I did not understand any of that. But when you explained that to me in 2020, like with your experience, me being an officer, like I understood it completely. I was like, man, those are the tough calls when when people's lives are at stake, like you're dealing with people, it gets tough. Like it gets hard. Like a program, sure, all day. But when it comes to people and tough decisions in between, it is hard. So I was able to understand it later when you explained that to me. I could definitely appreciate the burdens of command and how hard that can be when you got to just take the hit. I can't watch everybody 24/7, but I got to take this hit. So my last question, speaking on that, while we're kind of talking about that, is given your experiences in command and all the tough decisions and the highs and lows, the ebbs and flows, what is something that you would want everyone to know about the challenges of command, across the services, regardless of rank and status, command or who's not thinking about command? So what would you say
Yeah.
to those folks?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things is you can't control the inputs to the extent that you wish you could, and you can't even necessarily control the outcome. What you can control is you. You can control how you react to things. And I actually took a lot of strength from my faith, that I just sort of knew who was in charge, and it wasn't me.
Mm,
But who was in charge had my best in mind, and that kind of got me through a lot. In the end, I just realized I don't know if my key is going to fit the lock tomorrow. I don't know, but what I can do,
man, that's crazy.
I can try to present myself in a way that, tries to, keep the ship steady, keeps things moving along as best I can. And after that, I can't do anymore, right? I can't do more than the best I can. I can just do the best I can. And I don't control the output. And so if the outcome is that I do get fired, well, I guess God has that plan for me.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's where I
Wow.
ended up. And frankly, it got me through, and I look back on it and I learned a ton. And by the way, I still have very fond memories of the honor guard despite all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. All the trouble, the struggle times, we can laugh about those now, but when we were going through it, I'm sure it was rough. But I think the cool thing that you said was what Chief B has said before in other episodes and what Major Coppins has said as well is one is control what you can control. I think a lot of people, that's a basic principle that everybody needs to understand and grab. And then the next one, which was Major Coppins, was rely on your faith. Like wherever that is, whatever that lies, that will help you get through, right? So I appreciate the fact that you were able to kind of paint that same picture, even though you had different experiences at different times. So appreciate that. Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Colonel. We appreciate you.